And they communicate with each other to perform peer-to-peer transfers, to move data around, to make sure it's in the right place. They may pull data out of the shared file system and cache it in the cluster. They may also access remote services. And so the manager goes ahead and carries out the workflow that you define and give the results back to the application. And the key design point of TaskVine is that it leaves data on workers in the cluster wherever possible so that you can return to it quickly, because it's usually the case that that SSD attached right to the node gives better performance than a large shared file system. Just to zoom into one little worker here to give the idea, a given worker manages resources. So you can see it has memory, CPUs, GPUs, and then it also has a shared cache directory maintained on that node. And you can see all the entries in that shared cache directory have a unique name that is derived from either their content or their metadata. And then whenever we execute tasks, they are executed in a private namespace. And so you can see T1 there is consuming data RGC and producing output.txt. And the reason we have this two-level naming scheme is, as you know, in workflows, it is often the case that one task sees a name differently than another task. So here T1 is producing output.txt, and then that same file is later known as input.txt when it goes into T2. All right, and so that's the basic scheme by which tasks get executed in a way that we can capture all of their data access. And so what's especially nice about this now is we can order data transfers between every node in the system and exploit the complete bisection bandwidth of the cluster. So on the left there, we have a little visualization of our older system work queue, and the dots in the graph here represent transfers between nodes. So obviously with a centralized system, you only get one column there. And then in this run of TaskVine on the right, you can see there's data transfers between almost every pair of nodes. So this gives us enormous data bandwidth. This isn't going to be a lesson in the API, but just to give you a sense of it, if you wanted to write some TaskVine code directly, you would write some Python by which you declare your inputs to the workflow. You've got a file, you've got some literal data, you've got a URL, maybe you have a temporary file. And then you may even wrap those in some operators like untar or starch. And then you define tasks. That task may consist of an executable. And then we're going to attach things to the namespace of that task, maybe define some resources and submit it. Now, you might look at that and say, oh my gosh, I don't want to write all that code. That sounds like 2 pages of code already. You've only submitted one task. And yeah, you're probably right about that. And so really, we view TaskVine as an execution layer in the workflow stack. So TaskVine has been set up to execute tasks in a variety of workflow systems. So we can use it with Makeflow. We can use it with Parsl. That's our topic today. We can use it with Dask. Is that a 4-letter D word around here? We're allowed to say that? Okay. We can use it with Dask. And underneath, all those systems are using that aggregate storage for all of those components. All right, so that's a basic idea of what TaskVine does. Well, what's our interest as researchers? So our current focus is really on this question: how do we go about managing the graph of tasks and data items in order to meet the performance and resource constraints of both the user and the facility? So let me just give you a sense of the sort of things that get constructed here. So here's a high-energy physics data analysis application. This one's actually scaled down to a toy size. The real one is so big you can't even see the nodes when you zoom in here. And each one of these circles represents a Python function that is generating a piece of data that is then passed along to another Python function. And you can see right away from the structure of this thing that there's some structure we can exploit. We have these chains of functions here. There's no reason to bring all that data back home. We should just feed it into the next relevant thing in the pipeline. And only when we go ahead and bring it all together at the end to produce a histogram do we actually need to start moving data around. And so a structure like this is a great candidate for TaskVine, because TaskVine will keep all the I/O within the cluster until you finally get to the last step. Now, in computer science, no good deed goes unpunished. And so if I say we're going to use all of the storage on the nodes for temporary data, I only got another 100 slides, then pretty soon we're going to run out of storage, right? You have to delete the stuff. And so as you can see here, if we run it this way, what ends up happening is you accumulate data, and then your disks are full. And if you have 800 gigabytes of storage per node, then this will work. Yeah. Do you have 800 gigabytes per node? Maybe. It's pushing it, right? But if we restructure the computation to take advantage of the algebraic properties of the reduction. And just by making that change to the DAG, we can cut that storage consumption in half. And there's lots of examples of this. Let me zoom into this. This is some work by another one of my students, Thain. The other interesting thing that happens when you keep data on local nodes is you can lose it, right? Workers crash, they get evicted, what have you. And so this is an example of a workload where some things crashed, and we had to go back and re-execute things that are shown in pink. Now, here's the other thing. We don't really need to keep all those files around. We could start deleting stuff as soon as it's consumed. So we started doing that. So here's a workflow. This is the storage on each node, 25 gigabytes per node. And it's this graph back here, where basically the storage consumption goes way up and then stays up there. Well, so Jin came up with some techniques here where we can start pruning the data as we go. And you can see you get a big drop off as soon as some data is consumed, no longer needed. Now we only need 7 gigabytes per node. That's pretty reasonable. But there's a long tail of execution here, because when you start deleting things, and you can't go back when you lose them, right? So what do we have to do? We actually start changing the scheduling, and judiciously replicate certain things. And not only can we get the workflow to go faster, we can get the storage consumption down to 800 megabytes per node. Now we're talking. So that's an example of the sort of stuff that we're working on. We're very interested in how we manage these graphs and execute them efficiently, because there's many orders of magnitude between doing it the most obvious way and doing it in a much improved way. All right, so in all this stuff, Parsl and TaskVine work together. And so if you're interested in it, this is all in our manual, so you can go check out those appropriate sections. I want to thank Ben and Kyle and Yadu and Parsl team for being patient and excellent collaborators. If you want to install it, you can conda install Parsl NDCC tools, and the stuff goes together. And here's my research team, and if you're interested in TaskVine, you can check it out there. Thank you.